Welcome to Blurts and Spasms, a podcast by T. Collins Logan via SoundCloud, Session 2, an excerpt from my book, Memory Self, Nightmares. There were plenty of things to haunt my sleep. My mother recounts my waking her often during that time, my night terrors launching me out of my bed and up the stairs to her room. This happened so frequently that she finally told me to stay in my bed, no matter what, and wake her only if there was a stranger sneaking around the house, the overwhelming smell of smoke, or something equally emergent. So, night after night, I would wake, whimpering and frightened, into the semi-darkness of my brooding room. I did have things to ease my terror, of course, the comforting warmth of our pet beagle, Soda Cracker, who invariably curled up beside me on the bed, the blue-white glow of my nightlight to keep the shadows at bay, whatever toy I had stashed under my pillow, usually a current favorite among my Matchbox car collection, which I called Max Boxes, and a fraying monkey doll made of white-toed brown socks and cracked black buttons that I tucked neatly under my arm while I slept. Amid this safe cradle of familiar things, I would stare through the open door of my bedroom, listening for a slow, creaking step on the stairs. Or I would peek over the covers out of my bedroom window to make sure nothing was swooping down out of the sky to get me. A few years earlier, when I contracted chickenpox and my mother was forced yet again to leave me unattended in our Eugene home, I entertained myself by trying to find something intelligible to watch on TV. Most of the shows were inaccessible to my 5-year-old sensibilities until I stumbled across something called Dark Shadows. Although the plot and dialogue were nearly as incomprehensible as other daytime programming, this one had scary music and scary settings and people doing scary things to each other and things that weren't people doing scary things to people. Before I finally turned off the TV in a fit of fright, I think I even unplugged it from the wall, I had absorbed a lifetime's worth of nightmarish scenarios to feed my hyperactive imagination. So whenever I required some image to match the fear that I felt upon waking, my impressions of Dark Shadows were happy to supply one. Which is why, on one such still and dark night, when I awoke to spy something slowly creeping into view from below my window, I was sure I knew what to expect. A cloaked and grinning vampire that smelled of dust, or an angry ghost, or a homicidal relative. And if they were really going to drift eerily through my window, surely this warranted waking my mother. I clenched the covers and readied my scream. But when it came fully into view, I was entirely frozen with terror. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move any part of my body, not even my eyes, repulsed and riveted as I was. I couldn't even breathe. For just feet away from the foot of my bed, completely filling one of my bedroom window panes, was a giant, malevolently glowing vanilla wafer. It hovered, and I waited. I beheld the enlarged texture of its cookie surface, sliding past my window like a rough boulder floating in space. I trembled at its magnificent size and worried over its intent. What did it want? What was it going to do next? As I watched and wondered, I could swear the window was slowly inching open, and the strong scent of lemony vanilla abruptly wafted across my bed. Soda Cracker raised her head and, sensing something was amiss, whined softly. How could I save her? How could I save myself? Then, as if to prompt me into action, the vanilla wafer lumbered gently against the glass with a soft scraping sound. Somehow, I was out of my bed with Soda Cracker gathered in my arms, running up the stairs, crying out, "Mom, Mom, Mom!" in a frantic whisper yell. And she was there, in her bedroom doorway, pulling her flower print robe about her, sleepy irritation vanishing as she saw the terror on my face and the dog in my grasp. "What is it? What is it, honey? My window, climbing in my window!" And as if she had practiced this moment 1,000 times, my mother promptly reached back through her door, grabbed the leather blackjack from her nightstand, and headed bravely down the stairs. I trailed slowly after. "Mom," I called, trying to warn her. She waved me back. She had training. She had tried to become a policewoman that very year, studying for the written entrance exam and passing it, only to fail on the physical. She did everything they demanded of her, carried her own weight for 50 yards, hauled herself over a wall, executed dozens of push-ups and sit-ups, until they had her run hurdles around a track. That had hurt too much, she said. They hadn't let her wear a bra. If she wanted to do a man's job, she had to dress like a man, they said, and men didn't wear bras. So they made her take it off. After the 5th or 6th hurdle, the painful shock of her breasts slamming downward was too much to bear. She had cried herself off the field to the whistles and hoots of the other candidates and come home sad and defeated. But now, bravely facing an intruder in our home, it was her moment to shine. She turned on the lights. I waited long moments as she disappeared into my room, then ran in after her. My mother stood staring at the windows, blackjack still held high at the ready. "There's nobody here," she said flatly. She went to the windows and peered out. "Nobody, Todd." She lowered the weapon and turned to me. "It was there, Mom, I swear." I pointed out into the darkness. "It was huge." "What was huge?" "The cookie, the vanilla wafer. It was this big." I held my arms wide. "And the window was opening and it was coming through." "I have to sleep," she said accusingly. "I have to go to work. Don't you understand that?" She pointed the blackjack at me, then stalked from the room. "But I really saw it." From her tone, I knew I was on thin ice now, but this was important. She had to know. Mom stopped on the stairs, looked down at the blackjack in her hand, then over at me. I must have been quite a sight. Tears streaming down my face, dogs still clutched in my grip, sincerity gushing from my whole being. And in one of the miraculous, blink-of-an-eye mood changes she was capable of, my mother suddenly smiled at me, then grinned, then laughed. "Mom!" "Oh, honey." She set her weapon on the stairs and came back into my room, arms wide. I stepped into her embrace with huge relief. Soda Cracker's warm, wet tongue began happily licking both our faces. "You really saw a giant vanilla wafer?" she asked, still laughing. "Yes, it was outside floating, and then the window opened and I could smell it. I swear, Mom, I swear." And in response, she laughed again, and Soda Cracker licked at us, and the world was set right. After that night, for some inexplicable reason, I was no longer visited by night terrors. In the full light of day, perhaps the utter absurdity of a predatory vanilla wafer, no matter how huge and real it had seemed in the dark, had shaken my imagination free of those extreme and irrational fears. I could suddenly laugh about them, something I had not been able to do before. Thus the wafer dream became, in the sense of how fear affected my life, a rite of passage. However, I could no longer savor a box of vanilla wafers as I once had. In fact, even the smell of them still ties my stomach into knots, and on those rare occasions when I risk a taste, the feel of their finely bumped surface on my tongue sends chills to the very core of my soul. Thank you for listening.